Been advised that the recording has started. So welcome and thank you everyone for attending our final seminar of the Gilbrea Annual Seminar Series. This seminar is hybrid, so thanks so much to all the folks who are joining us online and to all the folks who are gathered with us here in the room. For those of you for whom I haven't met yet, my name is Nicole Dalmer. I'm currently the acting director of the Gilbrea Center for Studies on Aging for this year, and it's really wonderful to see new and familiar faces. I'd like to begin by first giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations as the traditional inhabitants of the lands where McMaster stands. To say that is to acknowledge a debt to those who were here, before us, and to recognize our responsibility as guests to both respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land. Over the past academic year, this seminar series has generated many opportunities for the exchange of ideas, and I think some scintillating discussions amongst researchers, undergrad and graduate students, community members, and older adults. We're very excited to have Umniyah Gilani, the current Carl Kananen graduate recipient, joining us in person to present on her thesis work titled Intergenerational Voices, exploring the self-reported experiences of South Asian individuals living in multi-generational households, which may be captured best as South Asian multi-generational living. Just a really quick few housekeeping notes. For those of the folks who are joining us online, I'll just ask that you keep yourselves on mute during the presentation just to avoid any background noise. We'll present for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for some question, answers, and conversations together. If any questions come to mind while Umniyah is sharing her work with us, feel free to, for those who are joining us online, jot it in the chat box that you can either have read out to you by Kyla, or you can unmute yourself during the Q&A session and either say it live in person for those of you who are here in the room, or live in person on Zoom. So I'd like to just share a little bit about Umniyah. I've had Umniyah as a student. She's a fabulous human. She's currently a second-year MA student in the Department of Health, Aging, and Society under the supervision of Dr. Anthea Enos. Umniyah earned an honors Bachelor of Science from the U of T with a double major in psychology and history of religions. And her current research, as you can tell here, focuses on the impact of intergenerational relationships and social support on the emotional and psychological well-being of individuals. And more specifically, she's exploring the benefits and challenges of living in South Asian multi-generational households and how the virtue of filial piety, which I think we'll learn a bit more about, shapes family caregiving and intergenerational solidarity when sharing the same spaces. So I invite you to join me in welcoming Umniyah to the stage.
Thank you to everyone who joined in person as well as on Zoom. My name is Umniyah, as Dr. Damer introduced me, and I'm so excited to share this journey with you. This is a very personal project for me, and I'm so glad to be here. I would also like to thank my supervisor and my committee members who have helped guide this research. And also acknowledge the Carl K. Award that helped support my research. So thank you again. And without further ado, I think we'll get started. So just as like some contents, first I'll be going over some literature as well as going into my research question. And then I'm going to touch on my positionality, some of my personal experiences, and then some of the theoretical frameworks that guided my research. And then we'll go into some methods and some of my preliminary findings. I have not concluded this project. I've completed data collections. These are just some of my early findings from this project that I'll be sharing today. And we'll get started. So as of 2022, approximately 1 million Canadians have been living in multi-generational households. A multi-generational household is defined as a household that has at least 3 or more generations. And this is a percentage that has grown by 45% over the last 20 years, which is a significant increase. The highest shares of multi-generational households is found in First Nation communities. And of the cities in Ontario, the highest number can be found in Brampton, which is a huge South Asian, specifically Indian population in Canada, followed by Surrey, which is in British Columbia, and Markham, again, back in Ontario. So a lot of the times, the families that are new to Canada are more likely to live in multi-generational households. This is mostly due to financial constraints for newcomers. So the term multi-generational household and intergenerational is used interchangeably in the literature. So I just wanted to clarify for my research. I use the term multi-generational to describe the household and intergenerational as the relationships amongst those different generations. So what has caused this increase in multi-generational households? The first one being increasing life expectancy. So we have more older adults in Canada currently, and people are able to spend more and more time with their parents and grandparents. The second one being financial constraints, which has led to more fledgling adults coming back and living with their parents. And these are adults that maybe moved away for school or work, and maybe in their late 20s, early 30s are coming back because the housing crisis in Canada has led to a lot of people moving back with their families. The last one being caregiving. So this consists of adult and child caregiving, which has also forced individuals to stay together in a multi-generational household. In addition to the factors mentioned earlier, most multi-generational households exist as people are trying to uphold filial piety. So this is the Asian philosophy that talks about a kind of a transaction, a generational contract. So because we took care of, because our parents took care of us when we were younger, we kind of have this obligation to take care of them when they're older. And this also focuses on respecting older adults and completing this contract. So a lot of the times, these young adults tend to stay with their grandparents and parents because they kind of want to complete that and fulfill that obligation throughout their life. And these cultural norms are kind of the core values of these individuals, which impacts them both positively and negatively, that we'll be talking about in a few minutes. So many of these South Asian families that are immigrants have moved from a collectivist society. So in the eastern side of the world, or I'm from Pakistan, so Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, we see a very collectivist society. We live with our families. We're used to having people around all the time, to a more Western perspective, which is a more individualistic society that focuses more on individualism and more emotional independence. So this in turn affects gender roles, it affects parent-child relationships, expectations, communications, all of which can impact family structure. So as such, some of my objectives are to explore the lived experiences of 3 or more generations within the same household, the effects of intergenerational relationships and these interactions on the emotional, psychological, and spiritual well-being of these individuals, and how the effects of these family compositions can in turn impact intergenerational relationships and interactions. So this leads me to my research question, which is, what are the self-reported benefits and challenges of living in South Asian multi-generational households? So I just wanted to touch briefly on a few things that kind of motivated me to make this personal project a more academic one. As a South Asian immigrant myself, I kind of bring firsthand knowledge in understanding these cultural nuances within these South Asian multi-generational households. So I grew up in a multi-generational household until I was 17. And I'm very grateful that I was able to spend time with both sides of my grandparents, so my maternal grandparents in my formative years, and then my paternal grandparents. So I learned a lot. I think there's a lot of benefits, but there's also challenges that come with it. So that's something I will be sharing with you today. And the next one being how my personal background allows me to be aware and reflect on the potential biases and assumptions that may influence my research. Because a lot of the people I interviewed, I knew through personal connections. So recognizing how that could impact and how I interpret my findings. And lastly, my shared cultural background with these participants helped kind of address that language gap. So I was able to communicate with them and interpret findings with a more sensitive approach to in the cultural context. So I just wanted to also touch on the theoretical framework that guided my research. I used the life course theory, which is a framework for understanding how individuals and families develop the change over time. So this considers influence of historical, social, and individual factors on a person's life experiences. So this paradigm has three different dimensions. The first being the timing of life transitions in the context of historical change. So this analyzes how individual life transitions like getting married, having children, and retiring are all shaped by the historical events and social changes that occur over a person's lifetime. So it looks at these changes that can affect the timing and the nature of these transitions. The second one being the synchronization of individual life and family transitions. So this focuses on how individual life events align with those of the other family members. So, for example, if a grandparent becomes a caregiver for a child, this can in turn also impact their relationship with their child, which is the parent. And the last one is the impact of earlier life events as shaped by historical circumstances. For instance, an individual's childhood experiences during a war or economic crisis could also affect their life choices and experiences. So by considering these dimensions, this life course perspective helps us understand how the human experience is so complex and it can evolve as we age. So just going a little bit into the research design, this was a qualitative study, so I had to follow ethical guidelines and an informed consent process. As for the location, it was the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area and the Niagara region, and I had a sample size of 10 participants. And amongst those 10 participants, 3 participants from one family and 3 participants from another family, and the rest were 4 individual participants. So I guess in total, there were about 6 families or family perspectives that I was able to analyze. As for the data collection, this was conducted through semi-structured interviews with South Asian individuals living in multi-generational households. Each participant was interviewed individually in their preferred language, which was English, Urdu, or Hindi. I only had one participant who spoke Hindi and partially a bit of Punjabi, so I had to translate the transcript. And this was a decision I made after a lot of thought if I should interview people collectively as a family or individually. But I think this method was specifically chosen because in our culture, there's a lot of fear of judgment, and there's less vulnerability you get when you share things in a group, which is such a taboo in our culture. So I think creating that level of comfort was important to me. Another interesting thing I noted was how the level of comfort in the interviews varied across different generations. So the older adults being the least vulnerable and open, I think, and the young adults were the most comfortable sharing and being more vulnerable with me. And I think this level of comfort with older adults being least open was, I noticed this because a lot of these older adults had very positive things to share about their family structure. Not that it can be positive, but I think when I was interviewing the same young adult or adult in the family, they had conflicting things to say. So there was like some conflicting data available where they were talking about the same thing, but in different contexts. So I think that was something that I noted that was quite interesting. The duration of the interviews was 1 hour at maximum, and these interviews were conducted over Zoom, and 2 of them were conducted in their family homes. As for the data analysis method, I used reflexive thematic analysis. So this is a method of analyzing qualitative data, such as interviews or observations, which emphasizes the researcher's role in the research process. So it involves identifying, interpreting, and understanding these themes and codes across different patterns, and continuously reflecting on how the researcher's own experiences can influence the data. And this is a process that continues throughout the research process, not just when analyzing the data. So as such, I came across 4 main themes. The first one being household responsibilities, caregiving responsibilities, faith, and family dynamics. So now I'll be sharing some of my preliminary findings with you with some direct quotes to add a bit more context. So the first one was household responsibilities, and the sub-theme was how shared tasks and support can be beneficial for the whole family. So most participants shared that everyone stepped in different ways. It kind of happens naturally. Everyone has a different role in the household. So the division of chores kind of just happens naturally. Most of the time, the mother or the mother-in-law or grandparent is cooking because she's the one who's mostly home. So that was something that I noticed across different participants. Another participant shared, I think the biggest benefit is shared responsibility. That's huge, especially in Canadian culture, where there's a strong hustle culture and everyone is always working. There's no concept of having maids or drivers like back home, so you're responsible for everything. It's nice to have multiple people in the house with different strengths to help with different things. Okay, the second sub-theme was societal expectations and challenges of that, with those expectations. So a lot of the role division is very traditional across South Asian households, where women are mostly responsible for cooking, caregiving, and men are mostly responsible for outdoor tasks. But there are some challenges that come with these societal expectations and gender norms. So one participant shared, with me growing up here and my parents growing up in Pakistan, they believe women should be a certain way. My dad and me always fought about this growing up. He's like, you need to be more soft-spoken. And I feel whenever they would lecture me, it would be in a way where I always have to be well-behaved so that when I grow up, I can be good to my husband. Even if they didn't say that directly, it would always feel like it was coming from that lens just because of the environment that they were brought up in. So this kind of adds a lot of pressure for women in South Asian households on how to act and how to behave that's socially acceptable. Another theme, or big theme, was caregiving responsibilities. So this includes both older adult caregiving and child caregiving. So some of the benefits of shared responsibility and caregiving was firstly caregiving for older adults. So one participant shared how her grandson takes care of her husband who's in a wheelchair. So that kind of caregiving goes both ways. And also children are able to learn a lot about caring for older adults when they live around those different generations. The next one being child caregiving. So, of course, the first one, the obvious one is physical care. So, if the parents ever have to step out for a bit or go away for the weekend, uh, they're at peace knowing that, there's someone to take care of their children at home. And one participant shared that she's at peace knowing that the kids are in good hands and she feels less guilty leaving her kids with her grandparents because they kind of also learn more about their culture and language. So it's a win-win. And obviously, it's a very cost-efficient way of caregiving. Um, you save a lot of child daycare or childcare costs when you have someone taking care of your child at home. And then the last one was exposure to language and cultural values. So language was a repeated theme across different participants. They were able to learn and practice their mother tongue, mostly because their grandparents were around, and they were the ones that were kind of emphasizing that language component compared to parents that were mostly at work or did not have the time to communicate. And because kids knew that our parents can understand English, they would just naturally code switch and start speaking in English. So they weren't forced to learn their native language unless they had to. So one young adult with a baby shared, I also appreciate that there are other people helping instill values in her. Sometimes I might miss things, but there are others watching and teaching her in their own ways. Everyone has different styles, how they feed her, what they teach her, and what language they use with her. So she's exposed to a variety of experiences that help her develop socially. So that exposure to different people is kind of good for their social development is what the participant was trying to share. So there's also a lot of challenges with caregiving and specifically older adults. The first one being caregiver burnout. Of course, it's very emotionally and physically draining to take care of older adults when you are working a full-time job. And this, unfortunately, usually ends up being the female or the woman's job in the household, as she's mostly taking care of the caregiving and household responsibilities. So one participant shared how her mom is already stressed and then feels guilty that she's not doing enough because her mom, after who was diagnosed with dementia, is always complaining. No matter how much she does for her, she's always complaining. So there's this sense of guilt added on top of that emotional stress. Another one is obviously financial constraints. So it can be very financially challenging for people who are not able to afford PSWs or a full-time nurse. Even if they are able to afford that, participants shared how they still have to take out the time to supervise that person when they're at home. And due to the lack of shared language with a PSW or a caregiver, communication can also be a major issue. So this can affect family dynamic as a whole. And one young adult shared, when you cling so much to these values, to the idea that I have to take care of this person, it can almost become a burden. It can create unhealthy dynamics between different generations within the family. Sometimes too much attention is focused on younger children, and the grandparents feel neglected. Other times, if a grandparent is very ill and requires constant care, the children might feel abandoned because their parents are too busy taking care of their parents. So while multigenerational living does promote selflessness, it can also reach an extreme where certain family members feel left behind. So this is kind of the challenges of balancing, and it mostly comes down to women if they're providing care, to kind of be there for their parents and then be there for their in-laws, and at the same time they're working and taking care of their children. So I think that's kind of the challenge for women in mostly in South Asian multi-generational households. As for child caregiving, there's a huge difference in how parenting can be done across different generations. One participant shared that the challenge of language used by the older generation was kind of discouraging for the kids. So one quote she shared was, "Sometimes you want to teach your child something, but the grandparent teaches them differently. Then the child gets confused. For example, my son was taking swimming lessons. He was in grade 2 swimming, but the teacher said he could move to grade 3. So my daughter got promoted to level 3, but my son didn't. When they came home, my daughter said, 'Oh, I got level 3.' And she told him, 'Oh, you failed again.' She used the word failed, and my mother-in-law picked up on it. She kept saying, 'Oh, you failed again. Every time you fail.' So that bothered me. I told her, 'No, he didn't fail. He just wasn't promoted this time, but he'll do that next time.' I don't want that kind of negativity like that affecting him." So this kind of shows the challenge of the language used by older adults, which can vary as we're becoming more inclusive, and our parenting styles have changed, right, across time. Another participant shared how she was trying to introduce solids to her baby. So South Asians normally start with purees when babies are young, but there's this growing movement in Canada called baby-led weaning, where babies are given whole chunks of food at a time, and they're able to, get a sense of different textures and try it out. So when she gave a whole chicken leg to her 9-month-old baby, her mother freaked out and she was horrified because she thought it was a choking hazard. So that kind of shows that generational difference in parenting can be very challenging, not just in how they raise kids, but also maintaining a good relationship with your in-laws or your parents, and kind of maintaining that family structure and dynamic. Another theme was faith. So some of the benefits of having older adults around was having that knowledge exchange and learning about religious beliefs and principles through their grandparents. So it's mostly the grandparents that were oftentimes responsible for religious teachings. One participant shared how he learned the Quran from his grandparent, the Quranic translation. And other participants shared watching religious programs as a family has instilled those religious values. Another sentiment shared by an adult was how being not too practicing has actually helped maintain that family dynamic. So I have a quote here that, okay, so in some ways, my parents' presence has influenced my children, but because my parents themselves are pragmatic about faith and don't force their ideas, I think it's been easier for my kids. Had my parents been very religious, I think it could have created resentment. Some grandparents have a strong influence on their household when it comes to religion. And at first, I wished my parents were more like that so they could pass down more of those traditions. But now I realize that it's probably for the best that they weren't. So it's almost a bit easier if there's no rigid religious practices from this perspective. So negotiating diverse beliefs and balancing that, difference in beliefs was another theme that came up. And this can be caused by, intergenerational dialogue, religious misinterpretation, and privacy compromise. So what I mean by religious misinterpretation is one participant shared that she got a very negative connotation from her grandparents because most of the times when she would bring up religion, it would be when she was cursing people. So she'd be like, oh, whoever did this to me, I hope he goes to hell. So she kind of got that very negative understanding of religion, but she shared that it didn't really impact how she believed or her faith, but it more so impacted her perception of her grandma, who was considered very religious. Another female participant who wears a hijab, which is a head covering, shared that when I wear a hijab, if my husband's brother unexpectedly comes downstairs, he might see me without it. From an Islamic perspective, you're not supposed to take off your hijab for anyone besides your father or your husband. So that's a boundary that I try to maintain, but sometimes it gets broken simply because we share a home. And as for the first, culture and religious negotiation, there's a quote that I have, which I think is really important, which shows how questioning some of those religious beliefs can create tension. So, because none of us are particularly religious, we don't really have conflict or deep discussions about faith, but sometimes I do question my parents about certain things. For example, if we're at dinner and pork is on the menu, I'll ask them why they don't eat it, because they're not strict about other things. They eat non-halal meat and they'll even drink alcohol on occasion, but pork is still off limits. I think that's pretty common for a lot of Muslims, but I find it interesting and contradictory, so I'll ask them about it. Those kinds of conversations can sometimes cause tension. They tend to dismiss my questions and accuse me of being self-loathing or hating my culture, but I think it's unfair. I'm not rejecting my background, I'm just questioning inconsistencies. So I think something personal is I feel like as a South Asian, a lot of the times we're taught not to challenge things or disagree with older adults or question them. And you start to internalize those feelings. And either you rebel or you kind of start accepting that maybe you're just always wrong. But I think it really comes down to the relationship you have with your family and how you're able to communicate with those family members. I think it's a change that I've noticed is our parents' generation is more receptive to feedback and listening to us and hearing our perspective. But I think I cannot win against my grandma. She will do what she has to do her way. She will, yeah, she will put a plate in the dishwater. It's the same way she would want to. So I think it kind of just depends how each generation can be influenced by the life that they have lived. The last theme was family dynamics. So how, as a whole, a lot of the themes that I've discussed can impact family structure and composition. The first sub-theme being social and emotional support benefits. So overall, participants shared that they were able to maintain a positive atmosphere. One participant, which is an adult, shared that me and my husband also have elders around, and it's kind of comforting for us. It reflects on how we are. When we're less burdened, we're softer, probably better parents. There's also this whole dynamic where everyone's living up to a standard. Everyone behaves a certain way because there's a code of conduct, and each generation brings their values into the household. So the next sub-theme was some of the conflicting values and communication challenges within this household. So the first one being lack of personal and emotional space. And I have a quote for that I'll share in a second. And the second one is being able to communicate those challenges with your family members because there's lack of receptiveness and privacy issues. So one adult shared how sometimes she wants to yell at her husband, but she can't do that because her mother-in-law is around. Another one was public displays of affection. So public display of affection is a taboo in South Asian cultures. You can't necessarily show affection in public or even in a family in front of your parents. So one participant shared that she can't openly show affection. And once her father-in-law told her that they're being too affectionate in front of them. So this kind of made things worse for her, and now she's overly conscious of it. She's like, we don't even sit too close together when they're around because there's just this sense of like taboo on how we're supposed to be around them. And she was talking about how it's tough because she wants to show that affection in front of her daughter, and she wants her to grow up knowing that love and warmth and affection, but she can't do that because she shares a family home. And that concludes most of my findings. So just the last quote that um, touched on some of the lack of emotional space and issues was I think the biggest thing is sometimes when I come home from university or I come home from work and it's been a long day of being outside the house, I just need to be alone for like an hour to recharge. I don't want to talk to anybody. I'm really exhausted. I'm kind of cranky and overstimulated. I just need to go to my room and chill. But my parents get very offended by this. My mom gets really upset with me all the time. So I think my journey has been similar in the sense that when I came here, I lived with my grandparents most of my life. And when I moved here to Canada about 10 years ago, um, I didn't know how to be by myself. And this is something that I worked on in the last decade. But I was so used to being surrounded by people, being stimulated all the time. And I couldn't quite differentiate being lonely and being alone. So I think that's something I'm working on. And I think I've come a long way. Um, so just some avenues for further exploration. I think it's interesting to maybe further down the line analyze each family as a unit. So as mentioned, there were some inconsistencies amongst family members or differing views in the data. So I think it could be interesting to see it as a case-by-case basis. The second one is home design considerations. So there's some research on this. I don't think there's a lot on specifically South Asian multi-generational households, but home layout is a big one. So one participant was sharing how she's very lucky to have a big house with two different levels. So she's able to separate those generations. So her parents live in the basement and she lives on the top floor. So you're not in each other's faces all the time. So you both have your personal space, but at the same time, you can maintain those boundaries. And then the last one being taking more of an ethnographic approach, where the researcher can fully immerse and observe these dynamics closely in their natural environment. So just some concluding sentiments. There's a quote I would like to share that kind of concludes my presentation. I also think multi-generational living teaches you selflessness. Having an older generation in the home means that as they age and become more prone to ailments, they require more support, not just from personal support workers, but also from younger family members. They need physical assistance with things, but just as importantly, they need emotional support. Aging can be very isolating, and I think the most important thing is to have people around them. That's inherently a cultural value in collectivist societies. We're raised with the idea that we take care of our elders rather than sending them away or leaving them to navigate old age alone. And yeah, as I conclude my interview, I think living in a multi-generational household has its challenges, of course, but I think the benefits for me personally outweigh those challenges. There's a lot of things, beautiful things I have learned from my grandparents that I will take forward and teach my kids one day. So having that family creates that strong support system. It maintains those certain traditions and cultural aspects that you would not have if you were living in a different living arrangement. I think it's definitely not for everyone, but it depends a lot on the family dynamics. And I think for me personally, it's something that I've always appreciated. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, we'll get into that.
Yes, Nicole.
Thanks, Umniyah, so much for your presentation and congratulations.
Thank you.
I wondered if you could speak a little bit about, you presented really nicely your positionality and your status as an insider. I'm wondering if, did you still encounter any surprises in your interviews? Despite the fact that you were perhaps an insider and had quite a bit of insight into what you might expect from this type of data?
I think because as I mentioned, a lot of these were personal connections, maybe not directly rated, but like one of them was my neighbors. And I think there's this sense of comfort that I mentioned. Yes, they feel a bit more comfortable sharing with someone they kind of know, but at the same time, there's a lot of hesitancy because they know me. So I think that's something that was kind of surprising, and that level of comfort that varies across different generations, I think was also interesting to note. I hope that answers your question. Alex?
It's sort of related to the previous question, but as I was listening to you, because I kind of grew up in a South Asian family type setting. I was born in India, so I can totally relate to what you're saying. The question I have is how difficult or challenging was it for you to avoid superimposing your knowledge and experience into the answers that were being given to you? So rather than waiting for the answer to come to you, you were filling in the blanks almost. Did you feel that at all?
I think it's definitely been a bit challenging because I try to separate myself from being a researcher and being someone from the South Asian community. So I try to look at the data as is from a more objective perspective. But again, I think you can mitigate all biases, but I also think that being a South Asian myself, I was able to understand a lot of those cultural nuances and sentiments and be more sensitive to those approaches that a non-South Asian wouldn't have been. And another thing was language. Sometimes, even though a lot of these people did it in English, they would code switch to a word in Urdu or a kind of expression that if I didn't understand Urdu or Hindi, I wouldn't have understood that. Yeah, so I think it created that bit of context that was required to understand those findings. Yeah.
Thank you.
Where's- Yeah, Trish?
Just a clarification, when you describe the participants, I think the last point said 4 young adults. So that was still in a multi-generational household. So there
Yes.
weren't 4 adults living in one house. It
No.
was in the whole group.
Yes, they were 4 individual participants, so who had been living in multi-generational households, but different families. Yeah.
There's a slide on faith. I
Mhm.
think it was the first one. The very first sentence. I'm curious about what the meaning was behind that sentence. Oh, no, next one. Oh, with the quote, yeah. What did that mean? I realized that it's probably for the best that they were. Did you?
Yeah, so the participant was basically describing how it's probably best that they weren't religious and they didn't have very practicing beliefs, because if they did, she was talking about how it could have created that resentment in the kids. So
Excellent. Yeah, I was really interested in the finding that the older adults tended to report more positive experiences with living in an intergenerational household versus the younger adults. I'm wondering if any of the participants offered any like solutions, like to counter those challenges, and if not, can you think of anything that could realistically be applied to counter the challenges?
yeah, so one quote that I shared was when this young adult was talking about she doesn't get that emotional space, and if she wants to be alone, she can't do that. And that's something she found it hard to communicate with her father. But one thing she also mentioned was when she was younger, there was a lot more, I guess she would kind of run from emotions and she would get very angry when communicating with her parents. But with time, she has learned how to better communicate and present what she's feeling more rationally and logically. So I think that's one way older adults shared that, or young adults shared how they could counter it or maybe look at more effective solutions of communication. And as for the older adults being more positive, I think it also comes from this cultural expectation that we care so much about what other people think of us. This is a very Eastern perspective, maybe in the West as well, but I think we see it in the East a lot. So because we tend to think so much about what they're going to say, what they're going to think of us, they just want to present things more more like on a neutral ground. But the younger generations are kind of challenging that traditional thinking. So I think they're more open to being honest and vulnerable about their experiences.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Trish?
Not big, I'm just thinking about choice. So if you have a chance to choose a multi-generational living situation, and depending on whether it's temporary, factor of economic reality, housing reality, or just job loss, or an extra child and costs, all of that. So that would likely have quite an impact on whether people felt positive or negative. And I think being a young adult is more challenging, and therefore you might find it more difficult because you didn't really have a choice. You moved back home because you lost your job, but you didn't have a choice.
Yeah, I think one pattern that I noticed was a lot of these individuals had grandparents because of caregiving solutions. So it was mostly older adult caregiving. So in our culture, we live with our families, we keep our grandparents with us, and that's more to do with upholding that obligation and filial piety that we discussed, because they took care of us, so we have to take care of them. So we don't really let go of that. So I think a lot of the times, if an older adult or a grandparent was sick or they had mobility issues, they tend to keep those grandparents close to them, which maybe it's a decision the parent made, but I think children don't get to have a lot of say in that you mentioned, right? So I think it can be quite challenging because they just have to navigate those differences as they grow up. And especially you see that shift in a lot of those immigrant parents that move here with their kids being raised in a very different society compared to back home. So those generational differences not just comes from a generation gap, but also like a huge cultural gap that can create problems.
Oh, yes.
More an observation than anything, that throughout the presentation, I was getting the feeling of that phrase, the sandwich generation. And I don't think that is anything that's just limited to South Asian culture. I think it's happened in a non-Asian culture in our family as well. My brother and I grew up with that when we were kids. And that experience, I think, actually helped him as he looked after my father in his last days in December. So I could empathize with what some of these people were saying.
Mhm. No, thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of the perspective that I shared was looking at older adults and the younger generation. I think I didn't quite analyze the adults that much, but I think it's also worth exploring that perspective.
I think I have more appreciation and respect for what my mother went through than I did at the time, because I'm older now.
Mm.
Probably a good thing I went through it.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for attending in person, and thank you to everyone who had joined us via Zoom for our final seminar of the 2024-2025 academic year. Thank you so much, Umniyah, for presenting your master's work. It was absolutely wonderful to hear. Give a round of applause for that.